Few years after we had moved to Mansalona, that Holly and I decided that we wanted to plant a garden. We had some good friends in the church that had done square foot gardening. If you don't know what it is, you build these either 8-foot by 4-foot or 4 by 4-foot boxes out of untreated 2x6s. You place them a couple feet apart in your yard, so you have access to these boxes on all sides. You dig up a little bit of the dirt underneath the boxes so they sit level, but you really end up filling them up with topsoil and dairy dew. Oh, you don't know what dairy dew is? Dairy dew is this wonderful compost that we got from the waste products from one of the local dairies in northern Michigan. It was great stuff. So after you would fill these boxes up with your soil and dairy dew, you'd use strings or thin strips of wood to divide each box into square foot sections. Then we got this wonderful book that told us how many of each plant we could put in each section. It was great. We loved having the fresh veggies throughout the summer. Loved having fresh herbs to put into our dishes. We were really good about getting the boxes together, filling them with soil and the fertilizer, sectioning them off. And we were pretty good about making sure they got planted every spring, even if they went in late a couple of years. But usually by the end of June or the beginning of July, we had an issue. Weeds were beginning to take over the garden. One of the advantages of a square foot garden is that nothing is more than 2 feet away from the edge. They're made so you can very easily water or weed your garden. But the one problem is you actually have to go out and do it. I love the excitement of planting the garden. There's always so much hope and anticipation in those moments. The harvesting is great as well. A couple of zucchinis and summer squash for dinner before they become the size of your head and you give them to your neighbor. Grab the bell peppers for a snack in the afternoon, or the fact that you had all the fixings to make salsa just in your backyard. But it was the mundane task of watering the garden and weeding it that sometimes that we lacked. See, it's not often in the exciting moments of faith, in the mountaintop moments, in the moments of pure joy that we have hard time in our faith. We've had strong moments of faith when we are participating in a baptism, watching members be inducted into the church, seeing our confirmation class every April, or even sometimes in the challenging moments of life. In those moments, we experience our faith. But I think it's sometimes harder to experience our faith in our everyday life. The mundane moments of our life that sometimes trip us up. This is what I think Jesus is talking about in this passage today. Jesus turns to speak to just his disciples at the beginning of chapter 17. These disciples have been following him for quite some while at this point, and they're beginning to see the implications of his message. Jesus begins by warning the disciples about putting stumbling blocks in front of other people. Jesus is not talking about people who are vindictively doing evil, but these disciples who are trying to follow Christ, but other people are putting up barriers in front of them. I think that Jesus is probably thinking about the Pharisees that were often adding rules to the Torah so they could have a more and more exclusive club, so they could have only people that looked like them, acted like them, had social status like them, that those people were included, and the others were left on the outside. I believe that Jesus is speaking to the fact that we need not put any barriers in front of people trying to follow him, especially those who have been marginalized, oppressed, those who have been hurting. They are the ones that are coming to meet Jesus. Often we want to add rules, hurdles, steps for people following Christ, trying to be Jesus' disciple. We want people who look like us, act like us in our club. But this is completely contrary to the message of Jesus throughout the Gospel of Luke. I was reminded of this A couple weeks ago, when we gathered with our Interfaith Clergy Association, we are an open and welcoming group. We have clergy from every gender identity, sexual orientation, and more. We have many people from different Christian denominations, as well as many religious traditions represented in our group. But it was interesting as we talked about the upcoming Interfaith Thanksgiving service, it was voiced that while we represented many of the East Lansing more progressive churches, there were many of our conservative evangelical brothers and sisters who were not going to be part of this service. A few of us that were putting together the service for Thanksgiving had an open and honest conversation on whether or not it was us who was putting up barriers to keeping them out of our group. I'll be honest, I'm not sure we came to a good conclusion, but we are having the conversation about who is not a part of our group, and if we are the ones that are putting up the stumbling blocks in front of them from being in. I mean, Jesus' warning is pretty stern. I'm a pretty good swimmer, but a millstone is pretty heavy. But we don't often have these kinds of conversations when we're on mountaintops. They come in the midst of the monthly clergy meeting. They come at the dinner table. They come as you're driving your kids to soccer practice. Conversations about how our faith plays out in all aspects of our lives happen during the dull moments, the down times. These are the mundane moments of faith that can be easily ignored, but need to be encouraged so that we can engage in these kind of conversations and this kind of inclusion. Jesus moves from the idea of stumbling blocks or barriers to faith to start talking about forgiveness. Before the disciples even ask, he tells them that they're going to need to forgive the person that comes to them with a repentant heart. Notice here that Jesus is talking about forgiving someone who has hurt or wronged them. Now, this is not a prescription for someone to stay in a toxic relationship or someone that is continuously harming them. What Jesus is talking about here is a way of living in community with one another. Whenever I'm doing pre-wedding counseling, I remind the couples that they're going to hurt one another. It is impossible to live in close proximity with other people without at least unintentionally harming each other, if not intentionally doing so. One of the lines that always ends up in my weddings, whether in a prayer and in the sermon, is I remind them that they're going to have times when they need to request forgiveness and offer it as well. This idea of forgiveness is central to Christianity. But Jesus takes it one step further. Not only are they supposed to forgive the repentant person the first time they are in need of it, but up to 7 times in one day. This has taken it to a whole new level. 7 holds a special significance for the Hebrew mind. Because in the creation poem, God made the heavens and the earth in 7 days. The number 7 is a symbol of completeness or wholeness. This is more than simple apology. This is a radical inclusion of all repentant people. This is moving forgiveness from being something that is done at the temple or in religious ceremonies to being something that happens every single day, wherever you find yourself. Having this kind of open and honest communication about how we hurt one another and offer forgiveness is like daily weeding the garden. It takes much less time to do a little work each day than having to spend all afternoon in the July sun pulling out all the large weeds that we have allowed to grow. Forgiveness is central to the life of Christians. Forgiveness is as crucial to the Christian walk as weeding a garden. It is at this moment, though, that the disciples finally speak up. And they ask for Jesus to increase their faith, and why wouldn't they? At some level, the disciples are thinking, if you want us to forgive at this level, we're going to need more faith. But it's here that Jesus refutes this idea. If you have faith but the size of a mustard seed, you will be able to do the impossible. be able to tell a tree to uproot itself and go into the sea. Jesus dismisses the idea that a person with a large amount of faith will be greater than the one who only has a little. It is because it doesn't matter the amount of faith that one has, but rather in whom that faith is placed. N.T. Wright says it like this: faith is like a window through which you can see something. What matters is not whether the window is 6 inches or 6 feet high. What matters is God, the God that your faith is looking out on. If it's the Creator God, the God active in Jesus and in the Spirit, then the tiniest little peephole of a window will give you access to power like you have never dreamed of. We often talk about the experience. We experience great faith. We're on the mountaintop moments. Or we talk about when we experienced our great faith as we traveled through the valley of the shadow of death. It is at these times that we are often aware of our great faith in God. But what happens in the mundane moments? It's not about something being new. It's not even about something that's coming to a culmination. It is any given Thursday of the month. And you have 2 doctor's appointments, the oil needs changed in your car, and the kids have hockey practice. Oh, wait, and you wanted to start a new diet, but you're running out of time to make the food. These are the moments that we miss our faith. These are the moments we're left with just a little bit, maybe only the size of a mustard seed. But it is in these moments that we need to remember that we are still called to care for one another, to be the people who are looking for opportunities to forgive, knowing that God's power is available to us no matter the amount of faith that we have. As I was preparing for this sermon, I came across a saint, St. John the Gardener. I hadn't heard of him before, but I decided to look him up. John was born of poor parents in Portugal. He was orphaned early in life. He spent many years begging door to door. After finding work in Spain as a shepherd, he shared the little he earned with those that needed it even more than himself. One day, 2 Franciscans encountered him on a journey. Engaging him in conversation, they took a liking to the simple man and invited him to come and work at their friary in Salamanca. He readily accepted and was assigned the task of assisting the brothers with the gardening duties. After a short time, John himself entered the Franciscan order and lived a life of prayer and meditation, fasting constantly, spending nights in prayer, and still helping the poor. Because of his work in the garden, the flowers he produced were for the altar, and that's how he became known as the gardener. Now, if you know Catholicism at all, you know you have patron saints of so many things. And St. John the Gardener is the patron saint of the mundane. I thought, what a beautiful idea. He's the patron saint of the everyday. His flowers were the ones that were used in the front of the altar at the friary. His work of weeding the garden every day had a huge impact on all who came into that place to worship. Pulling a single weed from the ground is a pretty mundane task, but it can be the most mundane acts of faith that can have some of the greatest impact. In a culture enamored by sensational news and highlight reels, it's easy to question our faith when it doesn't seem extraordinary. To be sure, there's nothing wrong with mountaintop moments, but the most mundane act of faith carries extraordinary potential for transforming the world into the image of its creator. So my friends, let us be the kind of people that act out our faith in the most mundane, small, and simple ways. Because like the faith the size of a mustard seed, it is not about our faith that transforms the world, but it's God's power in our faith. And my friends, in that way, we can all be saints of the mundane. To be God be the glory. Amen.